We have our guest, Jeff Slapp from Steel Dome. I invited Jeff onto the podcast because we've had some prior conversations that I thought were sort of the epitome of this podcast and what I want it to be. He's a very knowledgeable, very personable, candid type of guy. We've shared some career stories together, some personal as well as business value stories. And I think he is the perfect guest for my first guest on the Emmetson ROI Insights podcast. To get started, I'm going to give Jeff the floor and let him tell us about Steel Dome, what he's doing there, and how you guys do it differently.
Great, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me on today, and great to be speaking to everyone who's tuning in. We got a lot to cover. In fact, we probably could spend several sessions talking about what we're going to cover today, but in short, a little bit about just kind of where I came from, maybe to set the stage for what we're doing here at Steel Dome. I've been doing IT technology across all the areas, right? The networking, the systems, the storage, both physical, virtual, building data centers, building very large global networks for various companies that I've worked for over my career. Touched a lot of different areas, both in terms of the technology as well as the business side. This is my second company. But I've been the entrepreneur. I've been in the channel. I've been on the consumer side, on the service provider side. I've been very fortunate to intersect with all those areas. And the reason why I kind of jump out of the gate speaking about that is because what we've done here at Steel Dome really encompasses the experiences of what has happened, at least over my 25-year plus career now, which is scary to consider how fast that time has gone. I was very fortunate to intersect with, at the time, a completely unknown technology, a small company at the time called VMware. I'm sure everyone has heard of that name, and certainly as of late in the recent news and events that have happened this year. But that really set the tone and the trajectory for my career over the next 25 years from that point. And it seemed like everything that I did, no matter where I worked, no matter what I was doing, it always intersected with this new idea, or the newer idea at the time, of software-defined solutions in a software-driven world. And I was also very fortunate shortly thereafter, being introduced to VMware in the years to come there in the early days, to be introduced to other software-defined technologies, which would largely shape the other side of the coin, which is on the storage side, which is what we'll actually get into today in some part. Companies like DataCore that also set the tone, just like VMware did on the compute side, but for the storage side. And I was very fortunate to both work with them as a partner for many years when I had my first company, and then as a customer for many years in the data center world, and then actually working directly for them for 4 years. And it has been a tremendous experience over those years. And what I'd like to really get into today is, now that we're 25 years later, at least from my perspective, what have we learned, what have we gained, and where are we going? And that's really what Steel Dome and Steel Dome Technologies is really focused on affecting in our world today, is changing both the way we do things, but also changing the mindset and the way that we approach these problems today. And these problems are not the same problems that we had 20 plus years ago. But unfortunately, largely, a lot of the technologies that we have today are still applying methodologies and approaches that we've had for the last several decades. But the problem is that we cannot address the problem of scale, which is really the enemy here. Scale requires a completely different problem. Like I often say, you might be able to build a house with the tools you have in your garage, but using those same tools to try to build a skyscraper would be a very, very difficult, if not altogether impossible task. And that's really what we're doing here at Steel Dome, is bringing those types of robust technologies. And this is really our mission statement right here. If we were to encapsulate it, our mission statement is to bring enterprise class solutions to organizations of all sizes, right? And meeting them where they are. And what that means is bringing the enterprise class capabilities, not just to the enterprise, but the things that you would expect to have in the enterprise, to organizations that are not consider to be, relatively speaking, enterprise size, both in terms of, head count, the size of their IT department, their revenue, whatever the case is, whatever the metric is that you measure that by. But their data and what they do on a day-to-day is very important. So they should have access to those technologies that the biggest companies in the world have access to. So we'll get into that, but that's kind of a little bit about me, a little bit about the company and where we've been doing for the last, 3+ years now. And it's been an absolutely exhilarating time. And I'm sure we'll get into some of that, but a little bit of the philosophy around Steel Dome and why we do what we do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's super important that you have the full background on the company before we start setting it into a context of Jeff's career and how what he is doing today and what Steel Dome's doing today relates back to his personal philosophy. Because throughout my career, the conversations I've had the most meaningful have been the ones, not, we'll say, behind closed doors, but the ones after the marketing, the ones after you see the ad or the infographic on the internet. But after you get into a conversation, you really get to know the people. There's that saying, people do business with people they like. You can talk about a technology all day long, but if you don't understand the people behind it, then you may not be so inclined to do business with that company. And this is one of the key reasons why I've started this podcast, so you can get the insights between the product and the individuals. With that being said, you mentioned a few things of great interest of mine. And the fact is, you said that this is your second company that you're involved with in this capacity, and you have a new idea, and you're not addressing the problems of 20 years ago. You're addressing new problems.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges and sort of obstacles, and I'm really interested in the relationship between how you navigate the two concepts of confidence and courage to pursue these things with a high level of confidence. And based on, your evident success and where you are today, I've seen your LinkedIn history. You must have experienced a ton throughout your career in order to put yourself in a position where, as an executive leader of Steel Dome. And I think that there's always times when things don't go as planned and you feel like maybe you are the underdog, but clearly you've made it through. So I guess what I'm asking here is really if you can take us back through that first company to the second company and dig deep if you have to, but tell us a little story about how you navigated point A to point B to where you are today and how that's really informed the way that you're driving Steel Dome in the context of the courage that you need in order to be confident to lead that charge.
Yeah, no, that's an outstanding question. One that I could probably fill with several hours, but I'll spare you. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible, but give you the full range of the answer that I'm thinking of here, because that does cover a lot, and it's a very thoughtful question. So my first company, when I moved, I guess I used to live and work up in the Northeast United States, the New England area, and I came to where I am now, where I'm in South Florida, not because just the weather was nicer, but there was also a seemingly apparent vacuum in the technology space that was really twofold. One was just either the straight lack of technology that was available down in this area at that time, and this is in the early 2000s, but also the perception, which unfortunately or fortunately was correct, in that there were very few organizations that were doing it really well. There was a lot of dishonest type of business transactions happening, and I'm not, blissfully ignorant to say that, it isn't still happening today. But my point is that there was a very apparent vacuum. So that was a motivation to, if we were going to start a company, myself and my business partner at the time, if we were going to start a company, that was a very good place to do it. And we were right. It worked out really, really well, because that actually drove the path of my career to where I am today. And so I will say, in short, that when you're starting an organization, and again, this being my second one in it, I'll differentiate the first from the second here in a moment. The there's always questions that loom in terms of, can it be done? How long will it take us? Are we going to hit our targets? Are we going to be able to sustain ourselves? And all these questions come up. Uncertainty about technology, uncertainty about the approach, and what people will gravitate toward, and all of that. And I've seen all of those things in various forms over all the years that I've been doing this. And I will say that one of the things that you have to have, and it will become extremely relevant to what I'm doing here at Steel Dome. But my first company, which was by the way, a consulting firm. It was a managed service provider consulting firm, again, project-based work. It was very fulfilling because every problem we were solving for was unique, because every customer's situation was unique. And bringing the right technologies to bear on a particular situation was a very challenging one. And also, because I'm very motivated around technology, I'm very passionate about technology and its positive impact to businesses and individuals, which really at the end of the day is what we're talking about, because it is the individual that is affected. And I'll give examples about that in a moment. But seeing things starting at one place and becoming better through the application of technology was a prime motivator for me. So the love for the technology and the outcome, I guess, if I was to summarize it. So you have to have that passion, in my opinion. And this not only goes for someone who owns their own company, but even for individuals who are working for other companies, right, that they don't necessarily own. Having the passion and the love of what you do, I think is ultra critical, because we only have so much time in this life, right? And it's a shame if you look back and you look at, your career saying, well, I did that and I might have done very well financially or whatever the metric is that you measure success by, but were you completely fulfilled in what you do?
How you do it, not just what you're doing.
That's right. And the reason why I say this is because I have experienced, I've had my own company. I've built teams, led teams, managed teams, right? And I do distinguish that there is a difference between management and leadership. A wise gentleman told me one time that, managers manage things and leaders lead people, and you need both characteristics. Unfortunately, today we have a lot of managers, not as many leaders as maybe we should have. But regardless, if you love what you do and you have people that are on your team that love what they do, you will find that you will do a lot less people managing and people chasing, and you'll have a much healthier team and a much more productive team, right? 110% will be easy because they love what they do. And that's what I found myself doing really throughout my entire career, which I've been very fortunate to say, because what is required of me now in this role at Steel Dome and what we've done, or rather I would say the path that we started down, if I had known what it was required to get to where we are today, 3.5 years ago, right? If I had that crystal ball, I have to be honest. I'm a human being just like anybody else. I probably would have taken a moment of pause, because the problem, the challenge, and what had to actually be overcome to get to where we are right now was monumental.
I can relate.
Yeah. And I know many people can, and that's why I want to be very frank and say it like that, because again, that's not for everybody.
Again, no, it's super important to see the process. And again, this is another reason why I wanted to start this podcast as sort of the glass door. I think there's a lot of people out there talking about what they've done and what they do. There's a lot of flashy awards out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is a place for that, of course, and people need to know what you've accomplished. But I think most people would benefit, and not just these sort of, well, I will say outside of the buyer groups, individuals. I think everyone needs to know how to go about achieving what they're achieving, because a product doesn't solve a problem. Mm-hmm. The services solve a problem, and the ways that you implement a product solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And the ways that you navigate a career are what get you to where you want to go, which brings me back to something that you said, and you sort of touched on it, but I would love for you to elaborate a little bit between the philosophies and lessons that you learn between, we'll say, management and leaderships? Like, what was the aha moment that sort of gave you that transition in terms of effectiveness between management and leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And if I was to kind of roll back the tape, I have to say, again, I've been very fortunate that when I differentiated those two things in my mind, or when it became very apparent that those things were very different things, right? Were both required, but very different things in and of themselves. I had found that I fell into the type of style, I'll say. I'll even call it a management style, even though I would say it's more of a leadership style that takes the approach of the individual first. For instance, just like with our relationships with Steel Dome and the rest of the ecosystem, right? We've got technology alliances, we've got channel partners, of course, we've got customers and so on. Taking care of in this case, the alliance partner, the channel partner, the customer, or if you're working in an organization where you're in a leadership, taking care of the team member first, because with the understanding that that person, and in a lot of these cases, I was a manager or leader in like a systems engineering role, like a sales engineering role, very similar, right? They're generally synonymous terms. Taking care of the individual, making sure that they are absolutely at their most effective, that they have everything that they need, and that all the barriers have been removed that would prevent them from achieving that success. When you do that, then everything upstream of that, meaning me and my leadership and so on, all the way up to the CEO and to the shareholders, everybody benefits, everybody wins. Versus if I'm only looking out for me, if I'm only looking out for, the skin on my back and taking care of what's in my, immediate proximity, that's not really helping those that are on my team. So I just viewed things very differently from a synergy perspective.
Yeah.
And just like a customer, just like we view today with Steel Dome, we are successful because our customers are successful. And it is in our best interests to ensure their continued success, because that synergy exists bidirectionally, right? And so whether it's individual teams or global companies and relationships that we have, it's in our best interest to take care of those who we are working with. Or I would even say that my perspective had been working for. Whenever I took over a new team at any company I've ever worked for, I always introduced myself as someone who was working for the individual, not the other way around, which everybody has that mentality, right? They always have this idea of, the boss, the manager, and there's already a set expectation of how that cadence is going to play out.
Yeah.
So I immediately would break that paradigm down immediately with the first conversation and be like, listen, I'm here to work for you because your success is going to be my success. And I would explain that synergy so that it wasn't just some unspoken assumption, that we actually talked about it and it was understood in terms of the relationship. Yeah. Now, at the same time, I did have managerial responsibilities to do certain things, obviously within structure, but I was already, my personality type had already been shaped over the years to be a leadership first with the manager role second. And that's really, again, what we're doing here at Steel Dome is to really pour into not just the technology and the products, but to what you said, is the service that is also delivered around the delivery of those technologies. Because we're not selling technology to machines. We're selling it to people. We're selling it to groups of people, organizations who will benefit greatly from the technology. And again, it's very important.
I want to stop you there for a second, because I've been smiling because I think it's incredibly relevant what you're talking about in terms of the relationship between management and, we'll call it, the individual contributors, as well as, the high level leadership, because I don't think it's any secret throughout my career, I've been a little bit more of a creative, trapped in some of the individual contributor roles where I see a little bit outside of my perspective. And I'm not saying that to speak to my own graces. I'm seeing it in the perspective of the generational gap between, Z and the way that, we'll say, things have been done historically. And it used to be, and it still is by structure, but it's been a lot of the top down, handing down the orders and the leadership and the follow through without a lot of the listening and a lot of the adaptation between the individual personalities that I think it's very clear you were, we'll say, a little bit ahead of your time. Not to say it was entirely exclusive, but definitely did the right things to evolve into the type of leader that you are and exhibit those behaviors throughout the process. I just recently was reading an article on LinkedIn, and it was talking again about how, employers are struggling desperately to adapt to how Gen Z is seeing the workplace, and they're offering all sorts of, brand new services that to adapt to them. And I think that translates that way of thinking about people and who you work with and your clients makes total sense, not just on a business level, but a personal level, because you can take, a round peg and try to force it, through a square hole, which you can do, but of course it's going to get bashed up. And what happens then? It doesn't resemble itself and it doesn't fit. And then that's how things fall apart. That's how businesses, don't last because they can't scale. And you mentioned scalability before, and that's important too. Can you give me an example of how you've tailored the services of Steel Dome to really fit a certain market segment that fits into the ABC client type of format, right? You have your A clients, these are the ones we want to work with. Yeah. B clients, they'll work and this is great, but maybe not the perfect fit. And then C, it's like, hey, we're not dealing with them. So maybe start with the C clients. Like, who are the folks that maybe don't fit your profile that you would prefer an A client with?
Yeah, no, that's great. And of course, if you've been in business any length of time, you know that there is the full spectrum, right? I mean, that has to be said. There are clients that, whether it is the structure of the individuals that are involved with the organization or where they are in their growth trajectory, a whole myriad of variables that can come into play. We've positioned, first off, as a software company, as a 100% end-to-end, that's all we do, software company, right? The software, from a technology perspective, is extremely flexible and really, and we're not trying to be everything to everyone, but it is true that if you have great software, just like with water, it should take the shape of the container that it's in. Well, that's exactly what the software does for everything that we do, all three of our product lines.
It's very Bruce Lee of you.
Yeah, right, exactly, right? So that's really what great software should be. And a lot of things, unfortunately, today, when you look across the spectrum of technology, there are other software companies, but they put guardrails on it, right? And there may be good reasons for that. There may be business reasons. It's just a business decision. This is how we're going to do it, and this is as far as we're going to go. But the software, in general, should allow a much greater degree of flexibility than say a hardware, because hardware is hardware, right? You can do what you can do with it. This is what it is. This is whatever's in the box, and there you go. That's what you have. But the software should exploit that and deliver the maximum value that it possibly can. So with that, then, that means that our technology, again, that whole spectrum of, the small and medium-sized company that may be, either brand new on the journey, or maybe that's exactly where they want to be, and that is their journey, right? Is to operate at that layer, versus the enterprise, which has got a completely different mission and a much greater reach. The software does apply to both. However, to directly answer your question, we have adapted ourselves by surrounding, again, here's the synergy concept, right? You're going to see this constantly interwoven into everything that we do. We have surrounded ourselves with ecosystem partners that allow us to work very, very well with small and medium-sized companies, and again, to meet them where they are, right? That can tailor things very specifically to what they need, because the needs there are very, very different than what the needs are at the large enterprise, right? So our partner community, because we are software focused, we rely upon our partners to help us complete the equation, I like to say, and to, at the end of the day, work together as a singular unit on behalf of the customer to deliver whatever the solution is that we're looking to deliver at whatever scale we're looking to deliver it. right? Whether we're talking in the storage world, which I'm very much involved with on a day-to-day basis with a couple of our products, whether you're talking about companies that have very small amounts of storage, maybe only single-digit terabytes, up to tens of thousands of terabytes, right? Tens of petabytes, hundreds of petabytes per project, per site, right? Very, very, very large systems. But I have to keep reminding people that those small and medium-sized businesses, again, relatively speaking, won't stay where they are because, like any company, unless you're going out of business, right, your data footprint is not shrinking; it's growing.
Yeah.
And just like the enterprise companies had day one, they weren't born an enterprise company, right? They grew into that. Some more rapid than others, but everybody had a day one, and everyone had a starting point. And everyone is in a very different spot than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case is. So that's why we approach it like that. Everybody's data, what they're doing in their business is very important to them as it is right now, knowing that tomorrow or a year from now, it's going to be very different, right? So that's how we have worked to really support the A, B, and C, as you call it, the different ranges of clients in terms of their needs, and to be able to scale it. Right? Just like the software can scale, we have to be able to scale the services and the actual deliverable to meet the requirements of the customer. So hopefully that was helpful.
No, it's very helpful. And I'll ask you a question now that I don't know if you'll be able to answer, given respect to your clients and NDAs. But if you had the ability to answer the question of, can you give a high-level architecture, I said it again, architecture of how you took a client from point chaos or point pain point to a resolution and sort of the ROI that resulted from that. Sure. If you could give that in a framework without revealing any identifiers, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if I was to roll back the tape, and my introduction probably didn't cover this enough in detail, so I'll say it quickly here. Just like with anyone that's been in the IT world, there's always a gravitation toward one particular area. I have in the three areas of systems, storage, and networking, I have probably have the most passion for storage, right? The data, the foundation of everything that we do in the IT world. Right? When you think about a data center, right? Data is the main operative component there. So without the data, you don't need all the rest of the data center, right? You don't need the switches and servers, the routers, all the building. It's all there to serve the data. So storage is a big one. Storage is a big one because when it's not working, nothing else works, right? It's like the foundation of the house. If your foundation disappears, well, your house probably is going to disappear too. So storage is pivotal to what we do in multiple ways. But one of the major things that, again, because I'm so close to it and I'm so passionate about it, especially today, is to give you an example of what you were just talking about. Taking a customer first from the kind of what I call the light bulb event, right? Where a lot of what we do here at SteelDome, we talk and educate customers about there's a very different way of doing things. And again, it doesn't matter what scale you're at. Right? It's not like, well, that all sounds great, but I can't do that until I get to X amount of size of data capacity, right? That's not accurate. There's never a bad time to start this because it can take you anywhere that you want to go, right? It's not like there's a minimum that you have to meet. So, but when we talk to clients, one particular customer that I'm talking about here in this case, first you go through the introduction of the architecture, the idea, the concept, and of course, introducing the things that we are solving for. Now, a lot of those are going to be things that they're already fully aware of. But there's also going to be a category of things that had never even occurred to them because they weren't thinking in those terms. So in other words, we're solving problems in most cases, right? There's always going to be an element of this where we're solving a problem that they didn't even know that they had because they hadn't actually looked at it that way, right? It's a completely different set of lenses, I'll say, right? For those that wear glasses, right? So when you go through the technology and the advantages and the architecture, as you had spoken about, eventually you get to the aha moment. Now, what's interesting about this, and this goes back to what we were talking about as far as the synergistic dynamics between either individuals or corporations, right? I've always said, no one buys anything from anyone that they don't first know and trust, right? You have to know the person, you have to trust them, or the company, or whatever the entity is, right? So That is all being established when we talk with clients. First, they know that we're here not to just sell them something, but to actually, in some cases, radically transform the way that they're doing it, because this is actually holding you back and you have to address this. But in the course of that journey, that conversation, that trust is established, right? And then they get to know us. And then they get to understand us personally, that, they get to understand our backgrounds, where we came from as company owners and leaders in the organization, and trust is established. And therefore now it becomes, wow, these guys here, Steel Dome, are really in to see me succeed, right? It's not just they're trying another company trying to sell me something, because I think everybody is completely exhausted with that approach today.
Yeah. Yes.
No one wants to be sold anything, right? Let's just talk very plainly, right? Before we talk about how we're gonna do this, let's just talk about, theoretically, how would we get there? So once we get past that, then the light bulb event happens, and that's really what I personally live for. I love, because I know exactly when it happens, because I've seen it thousands of times. When they say, "Wow, wait a minute," so you're saying, comma, fill in the blank, right? That's usually how it starts. When they're starting to repeat back to me now what I've just explained, now I know they get it. Now I know they're seeing it. And I've seen it, again, thousands of times, where they realize that not only architecturally and technologically there's a different way of doing it, but again, because of this new era that we're in the scale, you really are being forced into that, right? The technologies that we've had for the last 4 decades are great. They've gotten us to where we are, but can they take us to the next 10 years, right? That's very questionable. So a new way of doing things is required. So they start to see that light bulb goes off. Then they look at, which is usually at the top of everybody's mind. It's always the number one thing that you go into every meeting understanding, right? Everyone has a budget. We've got to do things because we've only got a certain amount of capital to do what we need to do. How can we maximize that? Well, as it turns out, when we start going through the economics, which is, again, not the only thing, but is a very important thing. When we talk about the economics of what we do here and the impact that Steel Dome and our technologies have on these organizations, most times what they're going to find is that not only is the total, like the CapEx expenditure, right, that if you look over a standard life cycle period of, say 4 to 5 years for whether it's systems, storage, whatever the case is, usually 5 years is that magic number, give or take. When you look at that total range of time, there's a certain amount of CapEx and there's a certain amount of total operational cost, right? The total cost of ownership for the entire platform, whatever you're talking about. When we've done this analysis, not only do customers typically see usually upwards, if not beyond 50% savings in the CapEx, the platform, because of what it does and the flexibility of the software and the reduction of the total cost of ownership and all the components that contribute to that, the platform actually ends up paying for itself at least once, if not 2 and 3 times over in that same 5-year period. Now, I use the 5-year period because that's what everybody is so used to thinking. But that 5-year period, when you're on our technology, that doesn't apply. Because remember, we're software. And if we're doing software correctly, it shouldn't make any difference what the underlying hardware is today, tomorrow, 5, 10, 15 years from now, because all it's doing is getting faster, denser. It still abides by the same rules of computing, right? We haven't changed that. And it doesn't matter what the vendor is. So this means that now customers have 100% complete control over the economics, over the architecture, over the vendor selection, over the capacity, over the performance requirements, over the high availability requirements, and on and on and on and on. They have complete control of that. But they have that. But historically, the bigger problem, the biggest barrier to adoption for these types of technologies has always been that they've been very complex. Well, that was one of the very first things that we worked on when we started Steel Dome, was removing the complexity, because we knew that the technologies were what everybody needed, right? Either they need it now or they're well past that point, or they're going to need it, but it's coming, right? Depending on where you're at as a company or as an organization, it's going to happen. So how do we remove that barrier? Well, that's what we've spent the last 3+ years working on and perfecting, is making it very easy, very simple, very hands-off, largely automated, to get you from 0 to 100 very quickly, to get you focused on the things that actually matter, which is outcomes, whatever that is for your organization, whether it's for driving your business, your website, whether it's supporting internal operations. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, because every conversation now has to at least mention, these two letters, AI, right? And all the things related to that, and all of the offshoots, all the peripheral functions that AI,
Yes.
right?
Let me stop you there for just a second, because this whole time I've been smiling for a few different reasons. Some of them more personal and some of them business, and some of them more technology related. To break those out, first of all, because, and this is a good time to reiterate my disclaimer, Jeff's not here because I'm paying Jeff. Jeff did not, rather, he's not paying me. This is a no cost podcast. I don't reap any benefits financially, and there are no rules. There's very little guidance given in terms of what we're going to talk about today. He does not know any of the questions I was going to ask him, or neither of us knew where this conversation's going to go. But I invited him on because I knew that it would end up in the sort of energetic tone that we've landed in, because Jeff is incredibly passionate about what he does, and you can hear it in his voice, and there is no rehearsal. The way he talks about what he does, he is excited about what he's doing, and he cares about the end results. And that's the type of people that I would want to do business with, and that's why I invited him on here today. And I made this business and I named it after my son Emmett, because I wanted to build something that I could use as a platform to teach him that not just what I've done, but also how I've done it, and to see the process of how that goes. I think it's incredibly important that people are passionate about what they do. I'm very passionate about what I'm doing here today. This is the first version of this podcast, and I think it's already shaping out exactly how I envisioned it. And I just wanted to highlight that portion there. And I think people just need to hear that.
No, that's great. And I that's everything you said is 100% right on point. And that's how I think, to your point, is it's not scripted. I don't do anything scripted.
Right.
The only time I do something scripted is when if I have to give a presentation and I'm standing up in front of several hundred people and I've got 15 minutes to get to something. As you can probably tell, if you just let me go, I'll take the rest of your afternoon.
I love talkers, and I have several guests lined up. I think I have about 9 at this point over the next 45 days. Aside from the passion conversation and the topic of the drive and motivations, which we've touched on, I think, at great length. You mentioned the AI, and this is something that I think is extremely important, and we've gone over some of this, but can you talk about how important it is for the data to be set up, architectured, labeled, and categorized properly for organizations that are either in the early, mid, or ready to pull the trigger stages to implement AI in their business?
Yeah. No, and it's a huge topic, as you know. And I'll just give you, I would not consider myself, in fact, you'll never hear me use the word expert to describe any part of me, because there's always someone that knows more than me on anything I could possibly talk about. Right.
Amen.
I am here only because the people who came before me took the time to deposit that information to me and to teach me. So I'm certainly no one special, but I'll tell you what I know about AI and its impact here, and really how it's relevant to what we're doing. So when you talk to a lot of organizations, there's a ton of chatter about AI, but very few know where to even begin. And that's the conversation that we, right? Just like if you think about AI, right? AI is software and hardware, of course, just like anything is, just like any application is, right? If you just distill it down, right? I don't want to make it seem like I'm diluting it too far, but that at the end of the day, that's really what it is, right? It's something that operates against data to give you an outcome, right? That's an application, right? So what do you need first, before you can even have the conversation about, say, the light fixtures or the doorknobs that you have in your house? We need to talk about the foundation and the actual frame of the house first. And that's where we come in, right? Through software. And because it usually is done at such scale, economics is a real component of this. So this is even more relevant than probably any other area that we could talk about. But you need to have a conversation about the foundation. Where is the data going to live? How am I going to access it? How fast am I going to be able to access it? And the scale again, here's the scaling problem, right? We have to be able to deal with scale because AI operates on such massive data sets. You have to have a system that is appropriate to the task, right? So all of those things come into play, and that all very much intersects with what we're doing. What's really beautiful about what we've done is that, and I'm not exaggerating here. I do this several times per day, but when we stand up, like all of our technology is based on clustering technology. Okay. I mean, yes, we can support single nodes and things of that nature to start out, but the normal framework that we deploy our technology in is in the cluster. And that's very appropriate, certainly for AI in many applications today. So we can stand these clusters up usually within 20 to 30 minutes from nothing to fully operational. Now, what does that do? That saves the customer having to go out and get all these, well, if they don't already have them, right? Highly paid, engineers to go and do all this work and spend a lot of time doing it. And hopefully they get it right. We can turn this stuff up literally within 20 to 30 minutes and it's fully operational for them. So they get from zero to go very quickly with the least amount of cost, the least amount of brain damage, as I call it, because there's a lot that is usually associated with this type of, technology. And they now get to focus on the things that actually matter. What are we driving to? Right now that we've got the house built, now we go in and decorate the house, or we go and customize it. Now, if you want to run AI applications, like you want to stand up your own chat GPT, your own large language model inside your corporate network, no problem. That is a button in our software, not a 3 or 4 month long process. It is a button in our software, which usually within 60 seconds, say 2 minutes at the upper side, you'll have a fully functional chat GPT, large language model, fully operational, ready to receive data and do work. I'm giving you a very, very basic example, right? There's many, many other applications for it, but that's a big one today because people understand that with chat GPT and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, no, it's important to keep them simple. And I want to jump in and help and step on the side of Steel Dome here as a little bit of the sales guy, because I know we've had conversations earlier where you mentioned something for me. And as you said earlier, I am not an expert. And I love that you keep that mentality of not being an expert, but, reaching for it, going, if you jump to a different topic, but like calculus, right? You're headed towards infinity. You're never reaching it. You're aiming to continually expand. It's like that Simon Sinek having that infinite mindset. And that's
100%.
how I try to be here. This is one of the reasons why I'm here having these conversations.
And that's what I would define as a bad day, by the way, Daniel.
Yeah.
A bad day for me is not learning something.
Right.
I always strive to learn something and make myself better than what I was yesterday. So yeah, 100%. Simon Sinek and everything you just said, well, you 100% agree.
Yes. I mean, I love that guy. I think he's doing something totally different. And the way he talks about things is the way that he's one of my conversational idols, and in terms of the way he thinks and the way he makes other people think. To get back to what I was about to say, was you mentioned something about keeping it simple and or simplifying the process, and you mentioned something to me in one of our first conversations, and that was about, we'll say, the decision makers can get involved with you and how they make decisions based off of like that brain damage, you called it, right? Mm-hmm. So talk about SKUs, talk about how difficult it is or not difficult rather, to work with Steel Dome versus some of the older ways, and we'll call it the legacy buying.
Yeah. No, that's excellent, because that's really the second half of the equation for us. I've worked for a lot of the companies that are out there today. A lot of, most of them are well known hardware companies, software companies, everything in between. It's amazing to me how that we can solve such tremendously complicated technological problems with the solutions that are out there today, but then we completely blow the entire scene up with incomprehensible licensing models, right? So we decided not to do that. We decided that we were going to, for all of our products, we were going to make it as simple as you could possibly make it, right? So just to give you an example, I'll just use, because it's a very quick example for our 3 products today, right? For our data protection product, our InfiniVault, it's simply looked at as the amount of total storage that we are provisioning to the system. That's it. How many terabytes do we have? And we have packages for that, but it's one metric, right? Very, very simple. Same thing with Stratastore, right? Our enterprise tier 1 storage cluster. That is simply based on the amount of total terabytes of storage, physical storage that you are managing with the system, not how many nodes you have. It could be one node, it could be 100 nodes. It doesn't matter. How much total capacity do you have? That's it. And then with our Stratoserve, which is our hypervisor, our, in other words, VMware equivalent type product, for those that are familiar with VMware, that's just simply based on the number of nodes, right? It's not based on how much RAM you have, how many CPUs or cores or threads or anything else, right? Which is, again, I say that because that's what historically a lot of these companies have done, was have these 18-page, pages of, like catalog of SKUs, and it becomes just impossible not only to acquire it and to understand it, but also going forward, what happens when you change things and when it happens when you have to do renewals, right? It just becomes very, very problematic, right? And it's something that no one looks forward to. So we said, why? It doesn't have to be that way. Let's keep it simple. We've already taken a massively complicated technological problem and made it very simple, right? Something that would normally take weeks to deploy, we do it in 20, 30 minutes. Why can't we do the same thing with licensing and making it very simple? And also, again, bringing much higher value to the consumer, rather than nickel and diming them for every single feature, every little knob and every lever that they could possibly touch in the system. Why don't we just say, hey, when you have a license of, say, Stratoserve, right, our hypervisor product, you have everything in it right now. And as long as you maintain your support, which is the same policy every vendor has, you maintain support with the vendor that you're working with, you're entitled to every upgrade, every new feature, every new enhancement from now until forever, right? It's just part of how it works. And there's no getting, neck deep in all the SKUs and how they all relate and the complications of everything that comes from that. It just doesn't have to be that way. So we really worked very hard to find a model that simplified everything across the board. And that really is what is encapsulates what we do today at Steel Dome.
Well, I have been again smiling, and I love the fact that I'm sitting in this, and this is my first time hosting a podcast, but I'm having a really good time, and I'm very thrilled the way it came out. I know we are coming up at that point about the 50-minute mark, so I want to try to tail this back into the beginning of the conversation here and close it out with a little bit of a philosophical question. This is something that I'm contemplating making a staple segment of the podcast, and that is to end with an actual quote and see how it pertains in your perspective to the conversation we've had and the greater scope of your career. And the one I selected for this time, based off of we'll call it the leading edge technology that it is Steel Dome and the way you guys are doing things, is by Thomas Jefferson. It's credited to him, but it says, "I'm a great believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it." Mm-hmm. So what does that mean to you guys?
Yeah. I would say that the harder, to use his words, right, the harder that you work, he interpreted it as luck. I would say the harder that you work, the more opportunity you have. And by the way, what I mean by opportunity is the opportunity to both succeed and to fail. And again, I want to be careful with those words, because some of the greatest lessons in life might be with the quote unquote failures. But when you take it one step further, and I've done this, and this has been a maturity thing, right? Because I've been doing this now for a little bit. I wasn't thinking like this necessarily 25 years ago, but today I am. If you look at a failure as simply missing the target that you were after, it's very shallow. If you look at it in terms of what did you learn and did you gain from the experience, regardless of whether you hit the mark or not, that is a win in my book, right? So that's the opportunity that I'm talking about. And we shouldn't be fearful of what we, again, in our infancy stages in life, right? Failure looks like. Failure should be embraced. Failure should be taken. The tragedy is when you fail and you stop, right?
Yeah.
There's other quotes that come to mind too, along those same lines, right? Where failure is something that is not attempted. That is the greatest failure. Yeah. So there's a lot we could talk about there, but that's a really, really great quote. And yeah, The only thing I would say is I would just expound upon it, and like I just did with my own experience, to say that it's the hard work leads to opportunity, which then does lead to success, certainly more times than not. But even the failures should be a learning experience to make you better, so that you can not only do better in your own personal life, but you can also help others, possibly even avoid it, or even excel beyond where you were, right, to make us better as people. And I know that sounds all big grandiose, but that's really
No, it's not. These are the conversations that make sense to have. They're what's behind everything you mentioned earlier. I mean, I had one of my questions written down, and this is testament to the fact that Jeff doesn't know what I was going to ask him. I was going to ask you about, what motivates you, and you were answering that in your opening statements, talking about technology and being involved in technology as it evolves. That's what motivates you, staying at the forefront. And that what you essentially said as a response to my question regarding the quote was being prepared and taking action is what affords you that luck. And that is the hard work that's required. And I think that's extremely important when selecting a supplier. And again, this is not a promotion for Steel Dome. This is just how I truly feel about things. You will see alternatives appearing over the weeks and months, but I do believe that Jeff and the folks over at Steel Dome are onto something. I think they're doing it the right way. And if it were up to me and I was making a decision, I would say it's at least worth a conversation. So to that point, I think we've come pretty full circle with what I wanted to accomplish today. So I guess I would ask, aside from obviously reaching out to me at daniel@edmondsonry.com, how would they engage with yourself in Steel Dome?
we have multiple ways. Obviously, you can reach out to us. You can give our main number a call. You can reach out to us on contact forms on our website, on LinkedIn. We're very active on LinkedIn. We've got our folks like Matt, my CEO, Tony Franke, plenty of folks on the team, including myself, certainly, all willing to jump in and help wherever we can. And that's maybe the last thing that I'll say, just to kind of drill it back to what we started the call with. One of the things that me personally, even though I understand that I'm not ignorant of how the world works from this standpoint, but I have always been most interested in, again, the success and the outcome of the end user, the organization, in this case, the companies that are using our technology. That is first and foremost at the top of my list. And that is what I define as success, is to see their success. And I think that needs to be said, and it can't be said enough, because unfortunately, I don't think it's being said today, or at least it's not being heard. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the platform and the ability to come out and explore these different areas. And I very much look forward to the ones in the future, if you'll have me back.
Yes, of course. Of course, things will continue to change, and I'm sure you'll have new stories to share and hopefully an incredible amount of success to talk about. So thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you being on here, and look forward to what's coming next for you guys.
All right, great. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.